Welcome to Move Like This, brought to you by the Accounting Move Project and sponsored by Moss Adams, the Center for Accounting Transformation, and CPA Trendlines. On this podcast, we share ideas and hear from guests about how they find, retain, develop, and advance women and other underrepresented groups in their accounting firms. Now, on to our guest. Hello, and welcome to this new episode of Move Like This. I am very excited today to be talking to not one, but two lovely women who are smart as whips and going to share their information today. We have Claire Costin. She is an assistant professor at the University of Portland, and Steph Mason, who is an associate professor at DePaul University. So, first, thank you for being here and
Thank you.
give me just a little bit of background on what you are a professor in and just a little bit of an introduction, and then we'll jump right into some questions. So, Claire, start off.
Sure. So I'm Claire Costin, she, her. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Portland. In my practice life, I worked as a nonprofit auditor. So I teach auditing. I also teach financial, managerial, intermediate, fraud, ethics, a little bit of everything. So that's kind of my interest is in that space from a curricular standpoint. In research, I do research. Steph's one of my co-authors in the diversity space, looking at the effects of bias on folks in the workplace. Also working on some projects around intersectionality in gender and sexuality, and some other projects just about DEI in the profession. So that's my research because I am passionate about it, and that is actually nothing to do with how I was trained in my PhD program. I learned how to do a different methodology in a different topical area. Steph knows this. And I realized as I was going through my profession that it just didn't feel like it mattered that much. And I wanted to do research that aligned with my values. And so I shifted midstream, into my tenure clock. I decided I'm going to take a turn and do something that feels important and meaningful to me. So
I
that's
love
me.
that. All right, Steph, tell us a little bit about you.
So I'm Steph Mason. I'm on the faculty at DePaul University, primarily teaching what would be considered advanced accounting, um, both the main consolidations in governmental nonprofit portion, and then, some other topics. I have been at DePaul, I guess now about 13 years oh my God, I feel old all of a sudden. But I arrived at DePaul after getting a PhD in accounting. I started my life in accounting at one of the big four firms many, many years ago, and then went and got an MBA in finance and spent the next 12 years in investment management at a very large financial institution. And while there and being heavily involved in the organization's training program, I started to think about disparities in outcomes based on education and decided to go get a PhD and become a full-time faculty member. And so out of that, two research streams of mine were born. One was fair value accounting, which was something that I was interested in from a practice standpoint, but also, like Claire, inequity and outcomes based on demographic characteristics. So I have a stream of diversity research as well.
Wow. I am just honored to be here in your presence today and really appreciate you spending the time to kind of share your knowledge and experience with us. So, really, probably what we're going to focus on a good deal today is just what are you seeing with students, obviously, because you work closely with them. So, I'd like to start off by talking a little bit about, how are students thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion when evaluating potential employers, and what aspects of DEI matter the most to them? And do you have share some examples that you have that would, I guess, in a way, illustrate that point.
I'll let Claire start because she has a good example that I hope you share.
I will. Yeah. So, what I'm seeing with students is that they really care. And I'm going to preface this by saying that I'm speaking to you from Portland, Oregon, which is a pretty left of center place. It's in a left of center blue state, even though it's a University of Portland is a smaller private school, but our student body is still fairly progressive. Our faculty is very progressive. So I'm speaking to you from that, you know, through that lens. But my students really care. They are passionate. Two of my graduating seniors were officers in the Black Student Association at the University of Portland, and they were just very, very active doing work there. I had students in the Japanese Student Association as officers, many of them serving organizations on campus as treasurers that align with some part of their identity. So they're very much, interested in sharing their culture, celebrating the culture of everybody else. And I think that when they think about potential employers, they want to go to a place that feels like they're going to matter. They want to go somewhere where they feel like everyone's going to matter. And I think the story Steph's getting at, as far as just an example of how it affects their evaluation of potential employers. I had a student a few years ago who was top of the class. She was one of the co-presidents of our accounting association, an API woman, and had an internship at a big four firm, which turned into a position and an offer for a position which she accepted. And then during her senior year, she started to notice certain microaggressions that she was the recipient of from the recruiter at the firm. And just as for example, as the co-president of the accounting association, she was also kind of a campus ambassador for this organization. At our Meet the Firms night, which she helped organize and coordinate as her position as president, the recruiter from the firm where she was going to work, that she was an ambassador for, showed up at our Meet the Firms night with three white male students from a different university. And so she was talking to me during her spring semester senior year, and she's like, I feel like I'm crazy. Is it me? I'm all of these different experiences. I'm feeling like I'm not, I don't feel welcome. I don't feel accepted. And, it's describing different microaggressions, and shared with me that there were two other students of Asian descent who also had turned down positions for that reason. And she ended up reneging on the offer and going to work for a different firm. And she is wildly happy where she is now. But she was a brilliant, brilliant person, and she would have been a fabulous employee for them. And she walked away from a job senior year, spring semester senior year, knowing that she was going to find something somewhere, hoping she was going to find something somewhere because of the not the people she was going to be working with, not the partners, not the associates, not the managers, the recruiter. That was enough for her to say, I'm out, I'm done, I can't do this. So just as an example, she was very, very adamantly made the choice that respect for humans mattered more to her than the job offer that she had.
Wow. Good
So
for her.
Mm-hmm.
let me offer a perspective. I also am at a Catholic university, but I am at a university in Chicago. And so while we are in a large blue city and a relatively large blue state, we attract students from the region at large. But no matter what kinds of conservative backgrounds they come from, there is a respect for human dignity that I find in this generation that often surprises me, given that, I am 50 plus years of age. They aren't necessarily thinking as some things as diversity. It's life,
Mm.
right? I think that we often, not we on this call, but there's often a tendency to categorize people in ways that these young people just don't, it doesn't matter to them who someone loves, right? Where they worship, all those things are not the most meaningful thing that they think about when they think about people. But they take notice of when organizations don't respect people's humanity in the same way that they do.
Mm.
I've had over the last, I would say, 5 months, conversations with students about firm choices and organization choices in ways that I did not expect to have. Um, because the dissent in the retreat from quote unquote DEI initiatives has made a lot of people think about a lot of stuff. One in particular was a white male student, but he was a veteran.
Hmm.
And he was concerned about how some of these quote unquote initiative retreats. So, the firm, for example, that he was contemplating choosing was eliminating employee resource groups. Well, there are veterans employee resource groups. And he said to me, well, if they eliminate all the others and don't eliminate this one, that's problematic as well. And so I've been again shocked at, how many conversations I've had with students, I would say, in the last 5 months about some of this.
You
Uh,
know, I think that sorry, I was going to say that I saw a shirt that I want to buy for, myself and every human I know that just says, "You're probably DEI too." And on the back, it lists out, it's just a paragraph of all of these different, veterans, neurodivergent, LGBTQ, woman, body size, body art, whatever it is. There's something about everyone that they would qualify under the DEI umbrella, even those that are actively seeking to dismantle DEI systems at, in the government and institutions and organizations, they're also DEI. And I think that our students they're so much more aware of intersectionality and how different identities converge. And they're so much more nuanced when it comes to thinking about these issues. So I feel like, just as an example, this student of Steph's that's a veteran, recognizing, okay, well, it's not, today it's this, but tomorrow it's that, today if the deportation is folks who are here illegally, tomorrow it's American citizens. It's the same kind of a step from one to the next to the next, and it opens the door to strip away rights from more than just kind of the groups that we typically think about as being the first, kind of on the front lines of being the recipient of discrimination and hate and bigotry. And so they're also intelligent human beings who can see that. And I think sometimes they can see more clearly than the folks who are making these decisions, like for the student to say, okay, well, wait a minute. And I'm
Yes.
sure someone at the firm would say, well, no, like veterans, but this person's like, well, why not? If if this isn't important to you, how do I know that that's going to be important to you? And also, I think that students would say, if you won't do this for my, colleagues of color or my female colleagues or my LGBTQ colleagues, like students would say from an equity standpoint, it's not fair for me to have it and them not.
yeah. No, that's a really good point. And I like the point you made, Steph, about how they're not caught up in the details of somebody's race or somebody's ethnicity or gender or that kind of thing. But I I think that is the goal that we're all kind of hoping to one day achieve. Uh,
Yes.
but we're not there yet, obviously. So like all these things that are happening where programs are being removed and you know, I get so frustrated, and we didn't talk about this necessarily in advance, but when you start seeing meritocracy thrown around as an alternative, and I'm like, DEI is all about meritocracy, all we want
So
is opportunity, you know?
this is where I'm actually going to say, this is where I get so angry, right? Um, because people will say things, and I'm often surprised at the number of highly intelligent people who are well educated who say things like, well, we just want a meritocracy. No one's asking you to go to a world where meritocracy doesn't exist, right? What we are asking for is that everyone have an opportunity to participate in the things that their degrees have granted, right? So when I think about what led me to go into academia, I'll use an example from my own life. So I am a University of Chicago alum, and I ended up on Wall Street. While I was, in banking, it becomes very apparent that what's called core schools is super important to how the organization recruits. This is not unique to banking, right? Accounting firms, lots of firms have this idea that there's a very narrow sliver of schools from which they should recruit. The issue with that is you miss out on lots of great people.
Sure.
And so I would hear people say just ignorant things about, well, we don't go to such and such school because of such and such reason. But the reasons why people end up in certain schools that they end up has to do with systemic elimination of people from talent pools that then narrow the pool as you move up the food chain. My mother happens to also be an educator and was in the gifted and talented space. We literally eliminate opportunities for people's lives, starting at who is even considered for G&T programs in spaces. In America, for example, whether or not your school has calculus decides whether or not you can become a STEM person, right? If you never had calculus, you can't go to a school and major in engineering because that's a prerequisite almost to be considered. But one of the things we have to remember is there's inequity in how those decisions are made,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, what I want the profession to understand when we use the word meritocracy is meritocracy matters, yes, but we also have to think about how our society lacks meritocracy at so many points that when you are considering people, let's say for entry level positions, going to a school outside of your core schools doesn't mean that you're looking for less qualified people. It means you're opening the door to find gems that you may never have found before.
I completely agree with that. And even as we were talking before we started recording, I am in Atlanta, Georgia. And I used to work for an accounting firm. This has been a number of years ago. And I was in the marketing role, but I remember having a conversation with some of the partner group, and they were like, we're just not getting the applications. We're not getting the people that we want to apply for these jobs. That I'm asking the question. I was fairly new. I'm like, well, where are you going to recruit? What schools are you going to? And they mentioned University of Georgia, University of Tennessee, University of Alabama. And I'm like, y'all know Morehouse and Spelman are literally
Absolutely.
the street. Like what you don't have to take a day off to go to a recruiting fair there. Like they're less than, 10 miles from where this office was located. And it had never crossed their minds. So
So let me just jump in as the great granddaughter of an HBCU president. Um, One of the things that I am, and a graduate of the nation's largest HBCU before I got to U Chicago, I was a North Carolina A&T student and alum. Um, I often say to people, you just need to ask some basic questions. There's a reason why Morehouse is one of the largest feeders to Harvard
Mhm.
and Stanford, because they are putting students out that are equally yoked to the other students admitted at Harvard and Stanford. Howard is the largest producer of graduates, Black graduate students that go to Harvard. That's meaningful. And so when firms are often unwilling to put the research in, it shocks me. I'll leave it at that. It's shocking.
Well, it's also, I think it's interesting that, when we talk about a meritocracy, it's meritocracy for people who look and act and sound and think and believe like me. Because a lot of students who are coming from those traditionally, historically marginalized communities and spaces have had to work that much harder to get to where they are. So they are more qualified, they are more capable, they're more competent. So in a pure meritocracy, they're going to be chosen anyway as the most qualified candidate. It has nothing to do with them presenting a certain way, gender or race or anything else. Making they're having to work, so hard. Just when you start 500 miles behind the starting line, you have to really, really run fast to catch up. And so they come to the table with these phenomenal resumes and these phenomenal skill sets and capacities that, irrespective of their, presented identity, just makes them the best candidate for the job.
Mm-hmm. No, I completely agree with that. Well, Stephanie, through your work with the PhD project, what have you learned about mentoring, leadership, and the retention of underrepresented groups in academia? And how can these insights from your work with the project be applied to the accounting profession where similar representation gaps exist in firm leadership?
So I have to say this, the reason why I started smiling is because I realized that I live a life of mentorship. Because I have this belief that to whom much is given, much is required.
Mhm.
And with the PhD project, I had the benefit of being mentored by, very outstanding people that came before me in the profession who also, they were accountants who became academic accountants. So people like Sandra Shelton and Helen Brown LeBird and Jennifer Joe, people who saw something in me and decided that they should pour into me. So they made a difference to me. And so now that I'm the quote unquote older person, I not only feel like I feel like it's just absolutely required that I have to pay it forward to the people who are behind me. But one of the beauties of mentorship uh, is when you are taking care of the underrepresented, you also are taking care of everyone else too, right? And so, in my desire to make a more equitable place for the underrepresented students that I encounter, it also creates a platform that life becomes better, hopefully, for everyone that is in my class. So, when I first started, there was a lot of effort being made to level the playing field in terms of learning styles, right?
Mhm.
That some people are visual learners and some people. So I started, incorporating things um, to address some limitations that a small group had in the classroom, but it made it better for everyone else. So if I am bringing, let's say, a speaker into my class, as I know Claire does a lot of this, or I do a case in my class that introduces the students to some concept or a type of person that they have not encountered before. And I may be doing it for the benefit of, one group of students. The thing is it pays dividends for everyone else to
Mhm.
know, that Akeisha Williams Smith, who was behind me in undergrad and then helped start this function at the PCAOB exists. And I'm only saying this, Claire is smiling because she's featured her in her class. So the beauty of thinking about the quote unquote least of us, which is something that we hear a lot of when you grow up in the South and go to church, um, is it pays dividends for everyone.
Yeah, that's a beautiful point, and one that we make often with the Accounting Move project is, what's good for women is good for everyone. You know,
Absolutely.
and the same, like there, we need to institute flexible time off. Well, it's not
Yes,
women that are going to benefit from that. Everybody's going to benefit from that. So,
absolutely.
yeah, I love that. And see that in a whole variety of places in the world for sure. Well, Claire, you have done research on implicit bias in the accounting profession, and that research offers important insights to anybody that is in or adjacent to the profession. So, what trends are you seeing in firms today, and how does implicit bias affect the day-to-day experiences of employees?
I hate to sound like a broken record, but again, students are aware of it. They think about it. They know about it. The folks who are more in leadership often do not. And just as anecdotally, and it's an example of something that as Steph and I have done work in implicit bias. We've been the recipients of some doozies of review comments from folks when we submit papers to journals that
Understatement.
understatement of the century. And there was a review comment early on in our kind of developing this stream of research that it was a case is related to a fraud investigation. And so I assumed that it had been sent out to a fraud investigator in practice or at one point, somebody who had that background to review. And their review, report to us, one of the things they said was, the paper was basically finding that implicit bias affects how people think about their coworkers, and that racial and gender bias may play a part in presumption of guilt in alleged wrongdoing. And they said, well, when I was in practice, I just followed the evidence objectively. I wasn't biased. And my response to this person is, it's a paper about implicit bias, my guy. If you you don't think you had it, but you did. You 100, everybody does. And I catch myself so often thinking something and going, oh, that's a function of implicit bias. Let me, I'm not going to stop having that bias. I can't get rid of it, but I can react to it and respond to it in a way that is appropriate and responsible, and acknowledge and say, okay, hold on a second, that is a biased statement that is not based in any kind of reality. So just as an example. And as another example, I have a student who graduated a few years ago. He's a really, really, really intelligent student, lovely human, just one of the nicest people I've ever met. Came to see me about a year and a half after he graduated, and he was from Hawaii and getting ready to move back. And he had been working in a firm in Portland, and he was really, really just kind of distraught and struggling. I was like, what's going on? And he said, I feel like, again, he's like, I feel like I'm crazy, but this, I feel like I'm being treated differently than some of my white presenting coworkers. And gave an example of he'd had to take a day off for a medical emergency or something, and being, called into a meeting and reprimanded in HR, and just like this whole thing about having to take this emergency day off, whereas his white coworkers would take a day off and that wouldn't happen. So he's like, I'm being treated differently than some of my counterparts. And he's like, to the point that that became untenable. And he's like, I'm leaving. And not only am I leaving this job, I am leaving the state, and I'm going back home to Hawaii, and I'm going to, find something different to do. And I may not even work in the profession anymore. Not only am I leaving the job and the state, but I might just fully leave the profession and, you know, find something else. To which I said, you know what, whatever, please do what makes you happy. And it's never too late to course correct. So if you find that you want to open a restaurant, please, go forth and be happy and have a great life. But it's also a shame because, again, really brilliant, lovely person, strong student, good worker, great collaborator in terms of teamwork. And they're being the recipient of implicit bias and feeling like he was helpless to do anything about it caused him to exit stage right. So I think that and sometimes students can, younger employees can identify it for what it is, and sometimes they just feel it happening. But I think that there is still a lot of work to be done. And Steph, I'd love to hear your thoughts about this too. It's the newer employees, the younger folks are, they get it. The ones who are the gatekeepers, who have the power, don't always get it.
I agree. I often say some people, even people I encounter in my own interactions, are living in another century.
Hmm.
So.
Yeah. Well, yes, I'm sure we can all share examples of that. Steph, you've also done work with global accounting associations.
Yep.
So, how is DEI being approached internationally, and in what ways does that align with or differ from what you're seeing in US based organizations?
Oh, that's a good question because I started my Friday morning with a webinar with the European Accounting Association's uh, call for some diversity research for a special issue of one of their journals. I sat on the first panel that they did at the European Accounting Association on diversity in the profession. And this is not a knock on the EAA, right? Because I applaud them for doing it. But I had people tell me, oh, that's a woke American thing. And I have to remind them that people are different all around the world. And the example that I often use is Kylian Mbappe, my favorite football player. Um, when he is doing well, he is French. When he misses a penalty kick, he's called all of these ungodly names, right? That is an example of what it means to see the differences in other people. You see those differences when they don't meet your expectation of how they should perform. And so it doesn't matter whether you're talking about Indigenous Australians or Canadians, whether you are talking about Roma people in Eastern Europe. It doesn't matter if you are talking about, immigrants who have arrived on distant shores, no matter where they are. If you're talking about, religious minorities in parts of the world, diversity is something, even in an all white society, diversity exists because not everyone is the same, has the same heritage. So I divide the world into two camps.
Mm-hmm.
There's the camp of those who recognize that there is work still to be done. And then there are the camp of the deniers who think that they don't have these issues. And the thing is, particularly in the accounting space where there's mobility of labor markets, right? So people may take secondments in other places. It's something that you have to think about. And even if you only think about it in a gender space, there are different gender norms around, powerful women, depending on what kind of, place you're dealing with. And it's something that we have to take into consideration. Whether or not there's recognition of LGBTQ rights. There was someone, I don't remember who wrote a paper using interviews in France where they were looking at gay family leave. So people who had adopted children and what were the norms around that in comparison to heterosexual couples. The fact is, they're still parents, but by having differences in benefits available to them, that can create a stress on the family structure that might cause someone who otherwise was very talented to leave the firm. And so it's just reminding people, one, not all DEI is in, issues around race,
Mm-hmm.
that every society has a way that it has to think about um, supporting the needs of those who are, the term that I like to use from research is the non-dominant coalition.
Hmm. I like that. And you're right. I mean, I think part of the reason why a lot of DEI conversation does go to race is that that's something that we see
Yes,
in a lot of cases, not all, but when you're thinking about it, like everybody has age discrimination issues or gender or your
yes,
background. So, you grew up in a poor home that may have not had the connections that a lot of other people that you're competing with do. So it covers so
yeah,
many areas that I'm glad you're having those conversations and pointing those out.
yeah. And let me just say this, because I think this is one of the things I want firm, since we all are from an accounting firm role to think about, it's about empowering your non-dominant coalition to find success in the organization. Otherwise, you're just investing a ton of resources to train them to then leave. So
Mhm.
the cost to you, the organization, goes up exponentially because you're losing talent that you haven't tried to keep, not by giving them things, but by trying to make sure that the playing field is level across the dominant and the non-dominant coalition.
That's a great, great point. Well, Claire, I'm going to come back to you here, and you have done some research recently that found that many accounting firm employees wanted more focus on DEI, not less. And since the federal climate around DEI has shifted, I'm going to use the word shifted, even though I kind of want to use a stronger one there,
Hmm. Hmm.
has shifted in recent months. Have you noticed any changes in what you're hearing from those that are inside public accounting firms that you've talked to in the past?
I think that it's interesting because again, I'm coming to you from Portland, Oregon. So in some of the larger national firms, like there was one recently that required all employees to take pronouns out of email signatures because they would needed to be in compliance with the federal law because they had federal contracts or some such. And so for the students and the folks who are in those firms, in their local offices, like here in Portland, I think a lot of the firms are continuing to try to be as inclusive as they have been. And honestly, I want to just kind of an aside, when we say DEI, it's now that has somehow become a slur and it's become a dog whistle, and it proxies for a very specific group of humans. And like diversity and equity and inclusion as nouns, there's nothing bad about that. Everybody benefits, as Steph said. So it frustrates the hell out of me when it's become something that is said in derogatory, pejorative kind of a way. But I think that the local firms or the more regional firms that have less pressure from national headquarters are also leaning into it. But I get the sense from people I've talked to, employees there, that they're scared. The firms are scared, the employees are scared because the firms are scared. And this climate of fear is okay, well, we don't, instead of saying we don't need the federal contract, we're going to be okay, keep your email signatures the way you want and feel free to share your pronouns. Like that's the right thing to do, to speak truth to power. And speaking truth to power is really, really hard. And I was raised by a very strong woman who's a clinical psychologist who has, from the time I was before I could speak, training me and teaching me, you speak truth to power. That is what you do. And so part of the way I do that is through this research and through speaking out and through having zero filter, even when I should have one. And so I think that, there's, for some folks, there's a hope that it's going to continue, but my students who go out into the profession, folks who have been there for a couple of years, and I ask them, like, how's it going? Are they, are things still like in your office here in Portland? Are they continuing to do the work? And they'll say, I mean, yeah, for now, but I don't know. So I think that there's just, people are scared. And I think I worry every time I turn around, I see some other organization or corporation or group bend the knee and kiss the ring and capitulate. And I feel like our profession is one that is susceptible to doing that, and in some ways already has. I don't know that I see our profession as being one of the holdouts that's going to push back against the dismantling of DEI and fall right in line. I can see that being something that would feel pretty comfortable to our profession. So I worry, but
So I want to
again,
jump in and say
yeah.
something. Sorry if I was looking outside. The Cardinals are playing and they don't always. So that's the diversity in my neighborhood because we don't always have Cardinals on this side of town. Anyway, one of the things that I will say on the record, I am most disappointed by as we are thinking about the climate that we're living in, is the quickness for firms to put out public statements disavowing quote unquote DEI. And the reason I'm disappointed, even when some of these firms are silently or behind the scenes saying, yeah, but we're not really changing anything. We're just saying this, making these public statements. The problem is that you're talking about a labor force of people who are human with human feelings. The number of people at firms who then have to answer questions from parents, from spouses, from children about, is this really the place that you want to work? People thinking that mom's going to get fired because mom does this kind of work that you now have said this work doesn't matter. And so, what I like to say to the accounting firms, particularly the big ones, um, is you have to remember that what you are is a collection of human talent,
Mhm.
that tax returns and audits are not yet delivered by AI systems, that they are delivered by people that you expect to show up and be healthy and whole each day to serve the clients that funnel billions of dollars in revenue in your direction every year. And a part of that is when someone has to come to work feeling like no one in the organization cares about their type. We're not asking you to care, like because this is your sibling or because this is your child. We're asking you to care because you hired them. So you obviously respected their talent and you expect them to come and be productive so that you make money. And that's the point that I just continue to want the firms to hear. A lot of people feel bad right now, not because of who they are, but because you've released press releases and made all these statements disavowing your ties to something that there is some human connection to.
And that they feel is important. And in part, maybe the reason why they chose your firm in the first place as an employer over others.
Yes.
So, yeah, thank you for adding that. All right, so I have one more quick question for you and then a couple of just fun ones. So this is for both of you, and we'll start with you, Claire. What advice would you offer firm leaders who want to build a culture of belonging and stand out as an employer of choice in this market that we've been talking about? And in addition to that, a competitive talent market where there are a lot more jobs out there than there are people to fill them.
I think I would say be brave, take a stand, lean into your values, and then shout it from the rooftops and treat people first like people and then like employees. Creating those brave, courageous spaces to say, this is what's right, and we're doing it because it's right, full stop, without qualification, without only if it benefits us, without
Yeah.
conditions. That's how you're going to attract people who are going to not only be qualified, competent, capable, brilliant, intelligent human beings, but I'm more likely to want to show up at work if I feel like I'm doing work that aligns with my values. That there was a Deloitte study a few years ago about a sense of belonging. And one of the things that is really important to a sense of belonging at work is feeling like the work that you do matters. And if you're working
Yes.
for an organization that is not just talking the talk, but walking the walk, and again, speaking truth to power and not holding back and speaking up against injustices, and be the consequences what they may. And you know what? If these clients don't want to work with us, good. We don't need those kinds of clients anyway. That's how I think you stand out as an employer, because I don't think there's a lot of that happening in the profession right now.
Steph, anything to add to that?
Yes. Claire, I love you, by the way.
Hmm.
'Cause um, one of the things I think leaders have to remember is sometimes real listening skills is the first step to change. It's not just showing up to an ERG's meeting, to say some words. It's actually listening to them and being interested in what they have to say. I think everywhere you go now, you can find people who are feeling, you fill in the blank. right?
Yeah.
But having the audacity to listen to them, you might actually learn something that helps move your organization forward by leaps and bounds. It's sometimes not even just about your employees. It's if your employees feel this way, chances are you have clients out in the world that feel that way too.
Mhm.
So I had been featured some years ago in an article about the lack of diversity on Wall Street. And of course, they called me because I had, a fair enough career. And I said, one of the things that I find shocking, and I find this in accounting too, is firms will send someone in to get business with no one. I'm not saying everyone has to look like the person who you're trying to get business from, not look like, but sensitivities to who that person might be. And I always raise two things. One of my friends was telling me a story, who's in marketing, about a group of people who went to get some business from BMW, but they were all driving Mercedes. Well, that's dumb.
Yeah.
That's dumb. And last week, one of my friends who's in the event space was telling me about her firm going to pitch business to a Black women's organization, a major Black women's organization. And there was a team of four people, three white men, and an Indian man. And when they walked in, of course they didn't get the business because the folks in their heads were like, wait, this is the team coming to pitch the business, right? Because sometimes just meeting a person or a group of people where they are matters. Now, how does that apply in our space? Sometimes you have to understand that your client wants you to understand the world in which they live.
Mhm.
So if you aren't doing it for your employees who you see every day, how does that then translate to your clients who only see you maybe once a quarter, but they're taking notice?
Yeah. Yeah. And there are shared experiences that, I'm kind of shocked by the uh, all male team walking in to pitch the Black
Yes.
women's organization. But yeah, I mean, we don't, I work with plenty of people that don't look anything like me, but I do want somebody that understands what it's like to be a woman business owner that,
Yes.
you know,
Cultural competence matters.
yeah, lived experience.
Yes.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for all of this amazing conversation and wisdom. And I'm going to close with just a couple of fun questions. And I'm going to go to you first, Steph, with this one, and then Claire, you answer afterwards. So, when you were a child, 5 years old, whatever age you can remember, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Not an accountant. So it's so funny because I wanted to be a doctor and then I realized I didn't like the sight of blood. And so my mother said that she knew I was meant to be an educator because I used to teach my dolls all the time.
Ah, very cool. What about you, Claire?
You know, um, so a lot of things. My mom was a clinical psychologist and she was getting her PhD, so I thought maybe I wanted to do that. And then I also have an undergraduate degree in piano performance, so maybe I was going to do that. But at the end of the day, again, it always came back to educating. And my parents would go to the teaching store, which I thought as a child I wasn't allowed to go in. I thought only adults could go in the teaching store, and they'd get me like a grade book, and I had this whole system and a roster of students. And ironically, well, my least favorite thing to do in my job is grading. Now I can't stand it,
Same,
but
same.
I would have this whole like pretend system and a class and a curriculum and a syllabus, and so way back when I think I knew that it was definitely not accounting, was not the direction I was planning to go. Didn't even know it existed when I was a child, but I think just I've always been drawn to educating.
I like it. I like that you wound up, I think we all wind up somehow or other where we're supposed to be, hopefully.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you were given the chance to travel anywhere for free, you don't have to worry about time off or money or anything like that. Where would you go and why? Claire?
Claire?
So, I was thinking about this question, and it's really hard to narrow it down to one place, but I think if I could, I would go on a food tour. There's like, I've had some of the most amazing, like around the corner. I live in Portland, Oregon, like in the city, and around the corner from me, there's this amazing Iraqi restaurant, and across the street, there's an Ethiopian restaurant, and then across the street from that, there's a Thai place, and there's a Haitian restaurant not too far from here. And so, like all
Girl,
of
you're
these,
making me hungry.
Yeah.
you got to come to Portland, Steph. We go on a food tour here, just in Portland, and it's like there's so many places that I would go just to eat the food. Like, just I would just food hop from country to country. If I had unlimited resources, there's so many places that I've been exposed to the food, and I would like to go and try it like in its actual, where it's genesis. So that's where I would go.
I like that. What about you, Steph?
Now I gotta up my game, Claire, because I was just thinking about going to like Fiji. Okay, so now I want to do something a little. Not that Fiji isn't a great place to go, but now maybe I would say I'd go to Tuscany and do like a cooking, a cooking trip. Because
Fun.
I always wanted to make really good Italian food,
Mhm.
so that's what I'm going with now.
Oh, well, there's nothing wrong with Fiji either. So
No.
Yeah, true, true.
you can go both.
somewhere that somewhere that
Yeah.
there is no internet, so that I can just unplug from all of this for a
All
minute
of
would be
this.
nice. Would
Yeah.
be nice
Bonnie,
too.
I do want to say really quickly, I want you to know how much I appreciate the stuff that you're doing. It does
Same.
not go unnoticed for people out in the profession that there are still folks trying to move us forward. And no matter how difficult the journey might be, thank you for that. And please continue the work because it's definitely necessary.
Wow. Well, thank you. And I feel the same about all that you're doing. And I really do appreciate everything that you're doing. The fact that you took time out of your very busy schedules to have this conversation today. And I hope we can do it again sometime soon. And any
Yes,
way we can support each other, I'm sure we're there for it. So thank you.
definitely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Bye.
Bye, ladies. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you for listening to Move Like This, brought to you by the Accounting Move Project and sponsored by Moss Adams, the Center for Accounting Transformation, and CPA Trendlines. If you'd like to learn more, visit our website at accountingmoveproject.com. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends and colleagues too. I'm your host, Bonnie Buol Ruszczyk, and until next time, keep moving forward.